Views on this program are opinions of dental industry experts and not necessarily those of dentist advisors. Opinions shared in the following interview do not constitute personal financial advice. This program is furnished by Dentist Advisors, a registered investment advisor. You're tuned into Dentist Money Industry Expert Series. Now here's your host, Reese Harper.
Welcome to the Dentist Money Show. I'm your host, Reese Harper, and we are here with a special guest for the Industry Expert Series today, Mr. Weston Lunsford from Dental Intel. How you doing today, Weston?
Good. It's good to be here with you, Reese.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you coming up. We actually live within a short distance of each other, but we've never had a chance to do an interview, and my team told me that we got to make this happen, and I've been wanting to do it for a while. So thanks for coming up.
I'm excited to be on your show. I've listened to a few of your podcasts and think you guys do great work. So
thanks,
excited
man.
to contribute.
Yeah, I think a lot of people today are going to benefit from this because it's a subject that I'm super passionate about, and I know you are too, which is kind of understanding your numbers and making good decisions based on those numbers. And that's a really tough subject for a lot of dentists. So how about you give us some background on yourself, and you've got a really great background to lend some insight into this, and go ahead and give us some of the background and kind of how it got started.
Yeah, well, back in 2004, I started a CPA practice, and with that CPA practice, my partner, Shaylin Peck, at that time, we both decided that we didn't want to run a traditional practice where we're just doing passive work for our customers, and we didn't want to run a practice where we're doing too much work, where it was unnecessary work as well. And so we focused on being very proactive with our clientele. And as we started working with customers, Shaylin, and it actually has some professionals that are in medical and in the dental. One of his brothers is an orthodontist, actually practices up in Syracuse and very successful, and started referring quite a bit of dentists to us. And it really started in 2004, just expanding from there. We started focusing a lot on dentists and medical, and ended up liking more of the dentists than we did the medical, and so put most of our focus on the dentist. But our goal there was to be very proactive with our customers. And what I mean by that is we would actually meet with them at least quarterly to do planning, to identify what's working, what's not working, what their goals were, and to make sure that we're drawing out a map for them to be able to attain those goals.
Tell people how much they owe for their taxes.
We talked a lot about taxes. No, they didn't like it.
They don't seem to like that.
I had a trick, though. I had a trick. Do you want to hear our trick?
Yeah.
We would always overstate what they owed.
Okay. Always.
And then a couple hours back, we would say, look, we did some magic and here's some things, and we drop it down by 20 to 30%, and they loved us. They loved us.
So do you think a lot of people do that?
I think that happens all the time in the tax
Manage
world.
expectations.
Yes.
Okay.
That happens. So as we were working with dentists, we started recognizing something, and really it hit me in 2008. So after about doing this for 4 years, I started seeing a lot of my friends that were practicing in dentistry making a lot of money. And then I saw another side of friends that weren't making any money.
Yeah.
And they were struggling. And that struggle kind of carried into their personal life. And it all started with their practice. They were just stressed and anxious and not knowing what was going on. And so Shaylin and I decided we wanted to start really looking into this and trying to figure out what's the difference. And instead of focusing on after-the-fact accounting work and after-the-fact tax work, we started really diving into the leading indicators of a practice and what was causing success and what wasn't causing success. And I remember looking at some practices. They were within a couple hundred active patients from each other. But one doctor was taking home over $400,000 a year, and another doctor was taking home less than $120,000 a year.
Yeah.
And so it caused me to say, what is going on? And that really is what stemmed us into really focusing on the data and the numbers and just doing a decade of research, identifying what is it that we need to really focus on to make sure that we have a thriving practice versus one that's just kind of getting by.
Yeah, which it sounds like you had a passion for empowering the entrepreneur as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, dentists really like to be dentists. They like to be chairside. They're very clinically minded, and I love that. They're very touchy-feely type individuals where they're very close to individuals, and which is good. And then there's the business side of it. They are business owners. And oftentimes we see that they forget that side. But you know what I love about dentistry? You honestly can't fail.
Yeah,
I've seen one failure that we've worked with. One failure. Is that my phone?
Yeah, it's all right. Let's back up just 1 second, turn it off, and say, you paused and asked me. You said, "Do you want to know what I found?"
Okay, yeah. Do you want to know what I found about dentistry, though?
Let me know. I'm curious here.
You can't fail.
Okay.
In fact, I've seen one dental practice in the last 10 years fail. And what I mean by fail is he literally had to close his doors.
Yeah.
It's super healthy
It's a healthy industry. I mean, a lot of lenders lend not on the practice itself even. They're
just
lending
because
on
of
the industry, right?
Yeah, for sure. And in fact, less than 1% of dental loans are going into default. Less than 1%. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So, but the reality is, though, dentists can just get by and have what I would determine a pretty successful life in dentistry, but they're stressed, they're unsure, they're uncertain, they're not retiring when they want to retire, and they're definitely not retiring with the amount of money that they want to retire with.
Yeah, I just finished a presentation where I did a lot of research into what was the actual average retirement age of a dentist, and
and what'd you find?
That it right now, if you look at the income that dentists have as an average, right? Usually it'll rank anywhere from the second highest in the country to top 10, depending on the
They're always in
research.
the top 10 for the last 20 years. They've been in the top 10.
So they're making a ton of money, but the average U.S. citizen retires at age 62, and that was the most recent data from Gallup. And the average dentist, based on about 12,000 samples from the ADA, was that they're retiring at age 67.
Oh, man.
So the average dentist is retiring at 67, the average U.S. consumer at 62, in most cases making hundreds of thousands of dollars less than the dentist who has to retire 5 years later.
So let me share a statistic with you on what causes a lot of this. So this is something that we've seen. We've now synced just over 672 practices as of yesterday with our dashboard. And this is really interesting data, but on average, between the years of 5 and 7, we see practices plateauing. And even not just plateauing, but then we start seeing slight decreases, and then they pick up again and slight decreases, but they're flat. And they grew so fast for those first 3 to 5 years. They grew. And once they hit that mark, they start plateauing. And so our big research was why? What's going on? What's plateauing? But the reality is when a practice plateaus, it's not worth as much.
Yeah.
And so these dentists will get their practices up to 1.2 to 1.5, and good dentists are getting them up into the $3 million marks and higher.
Yeah.
But then they start plateauing, and so the practice isn't worth $3 million anymore. It's worth 60% of that.
Yep.
Where if they can keep that practice growing, then they'll be able to retire earlier, because a practice that's growing and is $1 million practice, I can get $1 million for that. But a practice that's plateaued is only making $1 million, then we're only getting about 65 to 70% for those practices. So they're retiring on a lot less money when they actually sell their practice.
Yeah. Well, in our, I guess I'm kind of curious. Let's talk about the dashboard just a little bit, because a lot of people are going to say, oh, great, another thing I've got to look at that I don't understand, that, another thing I need, but I don't understand numbers. They're complicated. I want to understand them, but it seems like every time I start going on a numbers kick, I burn out within a month or two, and then I'm back to the same old. So talk to me about the dashboard a little bit, and the design that's gone into it, and why you feel like you guys have been able to turn numbers into something that's a little bit easier to understand.
Okay. When I look at metrics or numbers, I'm a data geek. My background is accounting for the last 10 years. And so I love numbers. And dentists don't. Some dentists do. We come across some dentists that they blow my mind. And I love talking with them, and we have a lot of fun on the phone. But for the most part, dentists don't like it. And so we had to really take what we knew about data and simplify this. There's probably, as you've been in the industry, Reese, you know that there's at least 300 to 400 different metrics that you hear that people say you need to be measuring and monitoring and looking at.
Yeah.
That's overwhelming. That'd be overwhelming for me.
Yep.
So our objective when we started the research on identifying what is it that we really need to improve was to focus on simplifying this. On my dashboard, for example, we have what's called a performance board on the dashboard. There's 9 metrics. 9 metrics. But I can guarantee you that if every single one of those 9 metrics were performing at a level that we're saying that they need to be performing at, that practice will not have any problems. It will be thriving, and the culture will be healthy, and they'll be growing. And so we've really simplified what we're looking at in regards to how to improve the performance, and not just improve it, but to motivate and drive performance amongst the team members.
Let's talk about that just for a second. If you had to list, we could probably go through all 9 if we had a couple hours here, but talk about the top 2 or 3 that you feel like are the metrics that you feel like people really need to pay attention to.
Okay, before I tell you the top 2 or 3, can I tell you a simple formula to make this really easy for all your listeners?
Yeah.
Dentistry, all of the money in dentistry falls into 4 categories. So we have visits. You have to have visits that come into your practice. And then we have production on those visits, so production per visit. If I just take my visits and times it by my average production per visit, that's going to be the production that I make, my gross production, right? Once I produce the money, then we have to collect it. So the 3rd category is collections. After I collect the money, we typically are spending the money and hopefully saving some, but we're spending the money. And so then there's the financial aspect of it. So number 1 is our visits. Number 2 is how we're producing on those visits. Number 3 is how we're collecting the money that we produced. And number 4 is, are we spending it properly, right? Are we fiscally responsible with the money that we've earned?
How much of my money goes to things that are not me?
How much goes? So when I look at these 4 categories, really spending the money can be pretty simply managed. I mean, we have really good benchmarks out there for how much hygienists should cost in relationship to the production that they're doing. We have good benchmarks as far as what facility costs should be in regards to the amount of money that you're bringing in. So there's really good targets that you can try to budget in. The funny thing is most dentists don't do that, though. They don't look at that.
I was going to say, it seems like those numbers are advertised everywhere. There's lots of articles about what standards are. But when it comes to my own practice, it's hard for me to make those numbers fit my practice. Yeah. And I don't know. Why do you think people struggle with that?
I think it's because they don't have an easy way to measure and to monitor it. Accounting is so lagging. And so by the time I spend the money, a month has gone by. And by the time you finally get the books done, another month has gone by.
Do you think that sometimes it's hard for these guys to make decisions on people's payroll, that on people that are close to them, their friends, their family?
Yes.
When they know that their payroll's out of line, which is their biggest cost, right?
In Colorado. So when I say light up, that means we plugged in our dashboard, and within minutes we have a dashboard. So I call it light them up.
It's a fancy technology speak.
Fancy technology speak. But we lit up this practice in Colorado, and this doctor was 38% over where he should have been on his profit margins. Meaning he was barely making any money, because we want dentists to be somewhere between 35 to 55% on profit. He was 38% below, so he was just barely making any money in this practice.
And you're saying that 35 to 50 before they pay themselves, backing out all their pay.
Back out their pay.
Yeah.
So he wasn't making very much money. And as we looked at it, we immediately saw that he was 22% over on what he should have been industry-wise on paying his dental assistants. I immediately said, do you see this? Do you see where you're 22% over on your payroll, and it's specifically in dental assistants? And so our dashboard, we also break out the payroll, so we know by front admin, hygiene, and assistants, and then associates if I have them, so we can see if one's overstated within that category. And he immediately said, oh, I know. I have my dental assistant has been with me for the last 15 years. And then my niece ended up getting into dental assisting, so I had to hire her. And she had her friend that she needed. Yep. And this practice had 4 dental assistants by the time we got done talking. And he only had 800 active patients.
Yeah.
He didn't need 4 dental assistants. He needed 1.5.
Yeah.
And so sometimes that's what I love about dentists, though. They're so good-hearted.
Yeah.
And so they make decisions a lot based off of emotions.
Sometimes they'll sacrifice their own future, though.
They will.
For the people that they care about, right?
They will, but sometimes that ends up impacting the people they care about, because if the dentist is not thriving, the practice is not going to be thriving. And if the practice isn't going to be thriving, none of the team members can be thriving.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that. You sometimes, when you feel like you're doing someone a favor, if it's putting your finances in a position where it's not fair, you're not being compensated fairly for the work you're doing as an entrepreneur and as a practicing dentist, it's not really doing anyone any favors long term, you know?
Right.
I've seen a lot of practices have to lay people off rather than have a long, thriving, healthy career just because they've shortchange themselves on their overhead.
Very difficult circumstances.
Yeah.
But the good news is it's still a great industry. And so even without a lot of focus on the business side, you can still be doing okay. But I don't want practices doing okay. I want them doing great.
Yeah.
So back to these 4 metrics or these 4 categories. Financial side, it can be managed. There's a lot of people out there that can help. There's people like you that can help on that aspect and looking at where people are spending money and identifying if they're over or under in categories. The collection side can be a problem, but typically it's not. Most people realize when they go into a dental office, they've got to pay. And so we've seen a lot of our customers where they're actually have credits, a substantial credit balances. And I think because there's a lot of training and continuing education going out there now saying before you do any major treatments, collect at least 50% of that up front, collect the other 50% when they're in the office. And so we're seeing pretty good job on collections. Where we see issues on is the first 2 categories, which is the visits and the production per visit.
Yeah.
And a lot of doctors will focus on their production per hour. But when I think about production per hour, or they don't even go down that far, they'll just look at the production.
Just total number.
They look at the total number.
Yeah.
The question is if production didn't hit the mark for the week, or worse, they're looking at a monthly basis and it didn't hit the mark for the month, I'll ask dentists why, and they won't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes it'll come, well, I have a lot of open spaces in my chairs. And so then we'll look at that and say, okay, that's dealing with the visit side of things. Why do you have open spaces in your chair? I don't know. My front desk is not scheduling the way that they need to be scheduling. And sometimes she is. And in fact, sometimes dentists are not giving their front desk the credit they deserve. It's a hard job.
It's super tough. Yeah.
So when we look at these 4 categories, Reese, the most volatile is visits.
Visits, yeah.
Getting people in the chair in the right time and in the right chair is the most volatile aspect of it. When I look at visits, there's so many different metrics that can revolve around that. But the reality is I have to have the patients in the chair in order for my practice to make the money it needs to make. In fact, I'm just going to give you I don't have a whiteboard right now, but if I was to draw out a formula, let's say that we average $200 production per visit. That's just the dentist stat. And this is a metric that we show, average production per visit, because we want that to grow. In fact, I start seeing dentists when they start growing their visits, guess what starts happening to their production per visit?
Declining.
Starts decline.
Yeah.
And a big part of that is because they're getting busier. They can't spend as much quality of time with the patient, and so they're diagnosing but they're not getting treatment accepted because they're not presenting it in a way that's
it's not effective.
It's not effective, right? They're fast. They're rushing through it.
Yeah.
And so one of the things, though, that as we watch as visits go up, if I have one broken appointment and I'm averaging $200, let's say on a daily basis my cost is $1,000 a day.
Yeah.
Most dentists don't know that either.
Yeah.
What does it cost you to have your practice open a day?
Yeah.
We show that break-even number on the dashboard. But if they knew what it cost, so if it costs them $1,000 a day and they want to be at a 50% margin, how much production do they need to do?
Yeah.
$2,000, right?
Yep.
So they produce $2,000. They have costs of $1,000. They made $1,000 that day in profits.
Yep.
As long as they're able to collect all that money.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening, though, let's say that they're averaging that $200 per visit.
Yeah.
And so that means in order to generate $2,000 of production, they need to have 10 visits that come in. If one of those visits cancels, they lost $200. Now their gross production is $1,800. Their cost is still $1,000. They just lost 20% of their profits for that day by one no-show or one cancellation.
Yeah. A lot of times we'll wash that under the we'll just forget about it. Right? It's not a big deal.
They think it's no big deal.
That really does add up over a calendar year.
Oh man, it hurts. And so one of our performance metrics is broken appointments, and not just broken appointments, but broken appointments. And if they broke, did they reschedule the same day or did they get back on the schedule? And it would shock you looking at the data that we look at of how many broken appointments actually occur in a practice in a day that don't even get rescheduled back on. Even when I go back and look 2 months later, those appointments that accepted treatment, they accepted it.
Yeah.
They're still not rescheduled to come back in because they fall through the cracks.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing that we want to focus on is making sure that the visits we schedule, it's right there in front of us every day, that one, they're not breaking. And if they are, there's things that can be done. And but what we've seen, when performance is measured, performance improves. And when it's reported back to the entire team, the rate of that improvement, it starts to accelerate.
Yeah.
And it's almost like a game. It makes it fun, right?
Yeah.
We see that my cancellation percentage is sitting at 15%, and we see that it's a problem, and all of a sudden, a week later, it drops down to 12%. And now we want to even tighten it up even more, and it drops down to 6%. And so by having that type of a performance dashboard, it really drives performance and makes it fun and creates a healthy culture because everyone in the practice can see what's going on.
So one question that's maybe a more of an industry question I thought you'd add some good insight into. When we look at dentistry as an industry, there is a big trend to DSOs and consolidation, where I think your product could obviously benefit a multi-location practice. It can benefit a large group, but it also is, I mean, the roots of your product are with that single location, second location, sole proprietor, entrepreneur. That's still the bulk of the market, right? It's still the bulk of the
And I want to
market,
keep
right?
it there.
Yeah.
Right? And I think dentists are better suited to keep it there. I have to be a little bit careful because we have some large partners that have a lot of practices and a lot of DSOs and MSOs and corporate dentists that are using our product now.
Yeah.
The reality is these corporate organizations, they've had access to this data
for a long time.
This is why they're successful.
Yeah.
They understand it. They're business minded, and they look at the numbers to know what they need to do in the practice, and that's what's made them so successful and why they're gobbling up dental practices.
Yeah.
But the reality is the dentists themselves can do this. They can do it. They need to simplify things, and they need to be looking, discussing, and discovering what the data is saying. And if they keep those three simple things, look, discuss, and discover, then they're going to be successful. But they need to be able to have something to look at. And if I'm pulling a bunch of reports and taking hours to consolidate numbers, I don't want to spend time looking and discussing anymore because it's taken so much time just to run the reports.
Yeah, that's a good insight. I think. I think. How do you see the what does an independent dentist have to do in order to continue to thrive in this kind of changing market? Let's kind of end up with there. I think it's a good way to kind of summarize what you guys are trying to do. What do you see the real takeaway from what guys need to do to thrive as an entrepreneur?
I really strongly believe that dentists that are single associates or 1 to 2, 3 associates and maybe 1 to 5 locations, they really need to learn the business of dentistry. They need to understand the business. That doesn't mean they have to shift their focus, because if they're not producing, if they're not chairside with their patients, they're not making money either. But they still have to take some time, even if it's 1 hour a day, to understand the business of dentistry. And the reality is they think, well, how do I spend 1 hour a day? They can't. Without simplified solutions, technology is available now to where they can get data in a meaningful manner where they never have been able to do before.
Yeah.
But they really need to learn the business of dentistry to be successful.
Maybe one other question I'm thinking of here. Do you feel like sometimes dentists neglect the need for an employee in their office to actually take ownership over some of this stuff? Or do you think this is the dentist's responsibility primarily? How do you see that kind of synergy between someone? Because in a lot of cases, you'll see that the assistant gets promoted to the front, and the front gets promoted to office management, and office management doesn't have any financial background, but they're dealing with a business, and so there really isn't an operator with a business background.
It's a unique business, right?
It is, and
it's
these are
one of the
doing
small
millions
businesses where you'll see millions of dollars made where they don't have a CFO.
Yeah. So what do you feel like this is the dentist's responsibility, and that person, the dentist needs to build? I mean, obviously they need to increase their education and build some intellectual capital and grow as a leader and as a manager. But is that fair to ask them to be the service provider to the patients, full time, and try to learn these business skills, or they need some help?
They need help. First and foremost, they do need some help, but they still are the CEO of that practice, and so they need to be involved in it. Now, their time of involvement can be greatly reduced if they have good systems put in place, but they do need to be involved. I feel like every good, successful dental office needs a good right-hand person, whether they call them a team leader, whether they call them an office manager, someone that will help take the lead on this. But at the same time, that dentist has to make sure he's involved at some aspect. he can't just turn off the lights on that side of it and think that the practice is going to run successful, because it's his practice.
Yeah. Sometimes I think it's easy to just try to outsource things and not take responsibility over whether they're being properly implemented, right?
And outsourcing is great. Outsourcing is phenomenal.
Yeah.
I've watched a lot of practices outsource even things such as calls, right? Answering calls or collections. But the reality is, if the dentist is not involved in watching it, they'll still start trending down, even on converting new patient calls coming into the practice.
Yeah.
They'll start trending down. The doctor has to look at the stats. He needs to know what's going on, so that if something's not working the way that he feels it should, he can say something. And just by him even celebrating success, that will drive more success. Or by, if there's an area of focus, by bringing it up and saying, guys, it looks like this is an area we need to look at, that'll drive more success. He's got to be involved.
Yeah, it's awesome. Well, Weston, this is a great interview, man. It's my friend Weston Lunsford here. Weston, if people want to get in touch with you or in touch with Dental Intel, what's the best way for them to go about doing that?
So our website is dentalintel.com, and that's easy to find us there. They can email me personally if they want, weston@dentalintel.com, but going to our website's the best way to reach us.
That's awesome.
dentalintel.com.
Well, thanks for coming by, man. I think it's a lot of good insight today, and look forward to continuing to learn more about your success in the future. So thanks for swinging by.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Reese. A lot of fun.